I was hired to fake date my boss's son for 3 months because his father wanted him to stop embarrassing the family with his reputation, and I needed the money so badly I said yes, without thinking twice. But somewhere between the staged coffee dates, and the scripted hand-holding, and the fake smiles for his father's business dinners, I started catching real feelings, and by the time I realized what was happening, I was in way too deep to walk away without getting my heart destroyed. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button to help the channel grow so more stories like this one can reach the people who need them. My name is Derek, I'm 25 years old, and I work as a junior accountant at Mitchell Holdings, a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Chicago. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays decent, or at least it used to feel that way before everything went sideways. I share an apartment with a roommate in Lincoln Park. I take the L to work every morning. I grab coffee from the same shop on the corner, and most days blend together in a blur of spreadsheets and client meetings. I'm not complaining. I like routine. I like knowing what to expect. But 6 months ago, my whole world tilted, and that routine became a luxury I could no longer afford. My mom called me one Tuesday night in March. I was heating up leftover pizza and watching some procedural crime show when my phone rang. The second I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She's the type of person who always sounds upbeat, even when things are bad. But that night her voice was quiet and strained. She told me she'd been to the doctor. She told me they'd found a lump. She told me it was cancer. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I asked her a million questions. What stage? What kind? What's the treatment plan? She said it was early-stage breast cancer, that they caught it in time, that the prognosis was good, but she'd need surgery, radiation, maybe chemo. She said her insurance would cover most of it, but there were still copays, deductibles, medication costs, and she did not know how she was going to manage it all on her salary as a school librarian. I told her not to worry. I told her I'd help. I told her we'd figure it out together. But after I hung up, I sat on my couch in the dark and tried to do the math. My salary was around $55,000 a year before taxes. After rent, utilities, student loans, groceries, and everything else, I had maybe $500 left over each month. My mom needed thousands. I started sending her half my paycheck. I picked up freelance bookkeeping work on weekends. I stopped going out with friends. I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. But even with all that, I was barely keeping my head above water. I maxed out one credit card, then another. I started skipping meals to save money. I was exhausted, stressed, and running out of options. That's when everything changed. It was a Friday afternoon in late September. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance, when my desk phone rang. It was Richard Mitchell's assistant, a woman named Patricia who'd worked for him for 20 years and had a voice like steel. She said Mr. Mitchell would like to see you in his office now. My stomach dropped. In 3 years of working at Mitchell Holdings, I'd been called to Richard's office exactly twice. Once when I got hired, and once when I got a small raise. This felt different. This felt like I was about to get fired. I took the elevator up to the executive floor. My hands were sweating. I kept trying to think of what I'd done wrong. Had I made a mistake on a report? Had a client complained? I knocked on Richard's door and heard him say, "Come in." I walked into his massive corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard was sitting behind his enormous mahogany desk, looking every bit the powerful executive he was. 54 years old, perfectly tailored charcoal suit, silver hair combed back, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He gestured for me to sit. I sat. He didn't waste time. He said, "Derek, I am going to be very direct with you because I respect your intelligence, and I don't believe in dancing around the point. I need something from you, and in exchange, I am prepared to offer you a significant amount of money." I stared at him, confused. He continued. He said, "I'm aware of your situation. I know about your mother's illness. I know you've been struggling financially. I'm not trying to intrude on your privacy, but I pay attention to my employees, especially the ones who show up every day and do good work without complaint." I didn't know what to say. He leaned forward, hands folded on the desk. He said, "I have a problem, Derek. It's a personal problem, but it's starting to affect my business. The problem is my son." I knew Richard had a son. Everyone at the company knew. His name was Ethan Mitchell, and if you followed celebrity gossip or tabloid websites, you'd probably seen his name pop up a few times over the past couple years. He was 27, good-looking, rich, and according to the internet, kind of a mess. He'd been photographed stumbling out of clubs, getting into shouting matches with paparazzi, dating a string of people who all seemed to end up selling stories about him to the press. I'd never met him, but I'd heard people at work whisper about him. "Poor Richard," they'd say, "must be embarrassing." Richard said, "Ethan is talented. He's smart. He has a degree from Northwestern. He's been working in venture capital, and he has good instincts. But he's also reckless. He makes poor decisions. He's been in the tabloids more times than I can count, and it's starting to hurt my reputation. I have investors, Derek, serious people with serious money, and some of them are starting to ask questions. They're wondering if I can't manage my own son. How can I manage their investments? It's absurd, but that's the world we live in." I nodded slowly, still not understanding where this was going. Richard said I need Ethan to clean up his image. I need him to look stable, responsible, mature. And the fastest way to do that is to make it look like he's in a committed relationship. A relationship with someone respectable. Someone like you. I blinked. I said, I'm sorry. What? He said I'm offering to pay you to date my son. Well, to pretend to date him. For 3 months, you'll go on dates, you'll attend events together, you'll post photos on social media, you'll be seen in public as a couple. You'll make it look real. And at the end of 3 months, you'll stage a quiet, amicable breakup. In exchange, I will pay you $50,000. Cash, tax-free. I couldn't breathe. $50,000. That was almost a full year's salary. That would cover my mom's medical bills, pay off my credit cards, and leave me with a cushion. That would change everything. But this was also completely insane. I said, why me? Richard said several reasons. 1. You're professional and discreet. 2. You're roughly the same age as Ethan. 3. You're gay, and so is Ethan. So at least you'd be playing to the same audience. 4. You're not the type to run to the press or cause drama. And 5. Frankly, you need the money, and I'm willing to provide it. I felt like I was in some kind of fever dream. I said, does Ethan know about this? Richard said, not yet. I'll inform him this weekend. He'll go along with it. He doesn't have much choice. I own the company he works for. I control his trust fund. He'll cooperate. I should have said no. I should have stood up, walked out, and pretended this conversation never happened. But I thought about my mom. I thought about the bills piling up on my kitchen counter. I thought about how desperate I'd felt every single day for the past 6 months. And I said yes. Richard smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who'd just closed a deal. He said, excellent. I'll have Patricia send you the details. You'll meet Ethan this Sunday at 2 p.m. There's a coffee shop called Grind on West Randolph. Be there. Dress casually, but nicely. And Derek, this arrangement stays between us. No one else can know. I left his office in a daze. I took the elevator back down to my floor, sat at my desk, and stared at my computer screen without seeing anything. I'd just agreed to fake date my boss's son for money. What the hell had I just done? That Sunday, I showed up at Grind 20 minutes early because I'm pathologically incapable of being late to anything. I ordered a coffee, I didn't drink, and sat at a table near the window, watching people walk by on the streets. I had no idea what to expect. I'd looked Ethan up online the night before. There were dozens of photos, Ethan at clubs, Ethan at fashion shows, Ethan leaving restaurants with various people on his arm. He was objectively handsome. Tall, dark hair, strong jawline, intense blue eyes. But in every photo, he looked either bored, annoyed, or drunk. I wondered what kind of person he actually was. At 2:15, the door opened and Ethan walked in. He was wearing ripped black jeans, a leather jacket over a plain white tee, and aviator sunglasses, even though we were inside and it was overcast. He looked around the coffee shop with the air of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. When his eyes landed on me, he walked over, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down without saying hello. He took off his sunglasses and looked at me. Up close, he was even better looking than his photos. But there was something tired in his eyes, something worn down. He said, so, you're Derek. I said, yeah. He said, I'm Ethan, obviously. My dad probably told you all about me. I said, he mentioned you. Ethan laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He said, I bet he did. Let me guess. He said, I'm a screw-up, that I'm embarrassing him, that I need to get my act together. I didn't respond. Ethan leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He said, look, I don't want to do this any more than you probably do, but my dad's got me by the balls. So let's just get through the next 3 months. Collect your money, and move on with our lives. Sound good? I said, sure. He said, great. So here's how this is going to work. We'll go on public dates twice a week. Nothing private. We'll be seen at restaurants, museums, events, whatever. We'll hold hands when people are watching. We'll smile for the cameras. We'll post a couple photos online to make it look real. But when we're not in public, we don't have to pretend. We can just be strangers who are stuck in a business arrangement. Deal. I said, deal. Ethan stood up. He said, I'll text you when and where to meet for the first date. And hey, try not to fall in love with me or anything. I'm not really the relationship type. He put his sunglasses back on and walked out. I sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at my untouched coffee. I'd expected him to be difficult, but I hadn't expected him to be so cold, so dismissive. But that was fine. This was just a job. I didn't need to like him. I just needed to get through 3 months. The first official date was 3 days later at an upscale Italian restaurant in River North. Ethan had texted me the details with zero small talk, just the name of the restaurant and the time. I showed up in khakis and a button-down shirt, feeling overdressed and under. Ethan was already there, sitting at a table near the front window, scrolling on his phone. When I sat down, he barely looked up. He said my dad made sure there'd be paparazzi outside when we leave, so make sure you smile. I said okay. Dinner was painfully awkward. Ethan ordered wine and drank most of the bottle himself. He asked me questions about my job, my background, my hobbies, but it felt like he was reading from a script. I answered, but the conversation never flowed. It felt like 2 actors rehearsing lines. When the bill came, Ethan paid with a black Amex card and said, "Let's go." We walked outside, and sure enough, there were two photographers across the street. Ethan grabbed my hand. His grip was firm and impersonal. He said, "Smile like you're having a good time." We walked down the block together, and I heard the click of cameras behind us. When we turned the corner and the photographers were gone, Ethan dropped my hand immediately. He said, "Good job. See you next week." Then he got in a waiting car and left. I walked to the train alone, feeling hollow. This was going to be a long 3 months. The second date was at an art gallery opening. The third was at a charity gala. The fourth was brunch at a trendy spot in Wicker Park. Every time it was the same. We'd show up, we'd smile, we'd hold hands when people were looking, and then we'd go our separate ways the second we were out of sight. Ethan barely talked to me outside of the staged moments. He was polite but distant. I told myself it didn't matter. I was getting paid. I just had to stick it out. But then something shifted. It was our sixth date, a Friday night in late October. We were at some tech industry mixer that Richard had insisted we attend together. Ethan had been drinking again. Not enough to be drunk, but enough that his edges were softer, his guard lower. We were standing near the bar when an older man in an expensive suit walked up. He said, "Ethan Mitchell, is that you?" Ethan's whole body tensed. The man said, "I haven't seen you since that incident at the Langham. You caused quite a scene that night. Still making a fool of yourself." "I see." Ethan's jaw tightened. He said, "Excuse me?" The man smirked. He said, "Your father must be so proud." Ethan stepped forward, and I could see he was about to say something he'd regret. I grabbed his arm. I said, "We need to go." He looked at me, surprised. I said, "Now." I pulled him toward the exit before he could argue. We ended up outside on the sidewalk. The night air was cold, and Ethan was shaking, whether from anger or something else. I couldn't tell. He said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Because you were about to punch that guy, and that would have ended up all over the internet by morning." He stared at me, then he laughed, a short, bitter sound. He said, "You're right, I almost did. God, I'm so sick of this." I said, "Sick of what?" He said, "All of it. The pretending, the judgment. Everyone thinking they know who I am because of some tabloid story." I didn't know what to say. We stood there in silence. Then Ethan said, "Why are you doing this?" "My dad's paying you." "Yeah, but you don't seem like the kind of guy who'd normally do something like this. So why?" I told him the truth. I told him about my mom, about the cancer, about the bills. I told him I was desperate. Ethan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "I'm sorry. That's rough." I said, "It's okay." He said, "No, it's not. My dad shouldn't have put you in this position. But since he did, I'm glad it's you and not some asshole." That was the first real conversation we'd had. After that night, things started to change. Ethan started texting me outside of date logistics. Just small things. A meme, a song recommendation, a complaint about his dad. I'd text back. We started having actual conversations. He told me about his job in venture capital, how he actually liked it but felt pressure to be perfect all the time. He told me about growing up with Richard as a father, how nothing was ever good enough. How he de-acted out because it was the only way he felt like he had any control over his own life. I started to see him differently. He wasn't just some spoiled rich kid. He was lonely, he was hurt, and he was trying. By mid-November, our fake dates started to feel less fake. We'd laugh at inside jokes. We'd hold hands even when no one was watching. One night after dinner, we were walking along the Riverwalk, and Ethan stopped and said, "Can I tell you something?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I actually like spending time with you. Like for real, not for the cameras, just because." I didn't know what to say, so I just said I like spending time with you too. The 3-month deadline was approaching. Richard called me into his office in early December. He said, "You've exceeded my expectations, Derek. Ethan's image has improved significantly. The investors are pleased. We'll stage the breakup next week. You'll receive your payment by the end of the month." I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt sick, because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped pretending. I'd fallen for Ethan, and I had no idea if he felt the same way. I decided to tell him. We met at his apartment. I said, "We need to talk." He said, "Okay." I said, "Your dad wants us to break up next week." Ethan's face fell. He said, "Oh, right." I took a breath. I said, "But I don't want to. I have real feelings for you, Ethan. This stopped being fake for me a long time ago." Ethan stared at me. Then he said, "Derek, this whole thing was built on a lie." "How do I know what's real?" I said, "Because I'm telling you it's real." He shook his head. He said, "I can't do this. I've spent my whole life with people, pretending around me. I can't tell what's real anymore." I left that night feeling destroyed. We staged the breakup. Richard paid me. I sent the money to my mom, and I tried to move on. But 2 weeks later, Ethan showed up at my door. He said I was wrong. I was scared. "But I don't want to lose you. Let's try this for real." So we did. And a year later, we're still together. If you've ever faked something that became real, tell me your story, and don't forget to subscribe.